So, Womanjika, welcome. And I'd also like to, first of all, thank for the welcome to country and acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, their leaders, past and present and future. I'm actually here because I stood for council, not because I have any interest in politics at all, and I think I'm the least elected person in Australian historical politics. I've got 14 actually, I was exaggerating, 14 votes. I don't know anyone that voted for me, including myself. So constituent meetings are about this size. I actually, though, spent quite a lot of time trying to get the first Wurundjeri woman elected to council and was successful. But unfortunately, due to a former white lawyer, councillor who wanted her preferences and lied about the way that he supported her to create eligibility, and then phoned the Herald Sun, and then went and saw the, what do you call the place where they do all the election stuff? Anyway, reported her as a fraudulent candidate. After actually filling in her forms in his own handwriting and advising exactly what to do, she was made ineligible. And as a direct descendant of William Barrick, I kind of, no wonder, I find myself as thinking, we have a problem here. And so anyway, I'm here. And I'm here partly because I'd like to change the ways that Indigenous people can stand for elections, because most of them are removed from country, and particularly for councils you have to be living in the country, and of course if you're removed then that's quite difficult. So I actually would like a box that says I'm a traditional owner and therefore I can stand for election, and then white people, or any person, but particularly someone like me who would love to be represented on council by an Indigenous person, might get the opportunity to do that. So that's why I'm stood here. And I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to have actually 15 minutes. Partly because it's a big debate and it's really complex. And there are no answers, and whatever answer there is, it's not going to fit everybody, right? So taking it slowly and hearing from four perspectives and then getting some questions will help. I'd also like to say, and not by complaint, but something that I mentioned, is that I'm following three men, and then after me, then I'm another man, then there's two men, and then there's a woman going to speak. But actually homelessness is represented pretty evenly, but increasingly more evenly by men and women, and not necessarily on the street, but even now on the street that number's growing. And secondly, as somebody who started a welfare organisation focused on homeless people and then ran the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, in both cases, the majority of people working in those organisations has changed the situation with women. So we talked about this before, and there are reasons. Whatever, I understand, but I do think it's really important that we recognise this is an issue that impacts men and women, and on the whole, from my 30 years of looking at it, has been greatly changed by the advocacy and work of women. So then the next thing for me is just to say, I was asked to speak about policy, but I'm not a politician. I'm a social entrepreneur. I do things. But of course, when you've been doing things in this space for 30 years, you then reflect on why the bloody thing that you were trying to do yesterday and the day before and the day before didn't work. And so, I have a sense of that, and it won't be, but as a dyslexic person who's got no qualifications and was kicked off a master's course because, Nick, you just go to the end, you haven't told us what I've read, and I said it was bloody difficult reading and I forgot what it was because it took so long, I never actually managed to get through it. So I'm going to reflect on policy in my way, the best I can, and hopefully that opens a debate and a conversation. And I don't apologise for it, I'm just saying that's the way I'm going to do it. Cool. Now start. So I would say that my experience of working with homeless people and living with homeless people, actually, so I was brought up as a very rich, young, white, privileged fellow in south coast of England, in a very rich family, and I then had a sort of nervous breakdown, spent a bit of time thinking about taking my life, and as a response to that, and a lot of help from a bunch of people, I ended up deciding I needed to start again. And from the advice of a very lovely priest in London who said, "You're just ignorant," as a gift to me. He said, why don't you just go and live with people and get the other side of this situation? So I spent 2 years living in one of the poorest YMCAs in Great Britain, Liverpool, and then out of that grew an organisation with homeless people that you mentioned. And so one of the things that my experience about being working with homeless people is that they're there. People are homeless because they there's not a place to fit, right? And the place that you end up to fit is where somebody isn't controlling the way that you should fit. And I kind of understood that as a dyslexic boy who was had a mum that wasn't safe to live at home, so then they sent me to a Catholic institution where I was sexually abused. I understand when you're put in places and try to fit in a hole, and then I'm dyslexic, so I'm bottom of the class, then I'm getting beaten for being stupid, and I'm not thinking I'm stupid, but actually I'm not stupid. I just take information in a different way. I suddenly find I don't fit. Suddenly I was living for 2 years with some of the poorest people in Great Britain, and I fitted. I felt loved for the first time in my life. People kind of think, was it, I had a sort of Herald Sun equivalent article. They called me Saint Nick for the work I was doing, which was such a load of bollocks in comparison to what, I had literally saved my own life by meeting people that didn't judge me, and actually we just got on and did things every day. When I heard you were from the union, I go, that was exactly how it felt for me. It was like, I'm in this place, I'm feeling alone, but actually I'm less judged here because I'm out of it. I've taken myself out of it, and now I'm with other people that have taken themselves out of it. Shit, I'm home. This is real. And so why are we there? And that's not, it's all about policy, right? But it's actually about who we are. So if you think at the moment where, the Catholic Church, I have 2 children. I know that and I went to a Catholic school, but actually I know that statistically, if you want to put your child in the most unsafe place in Australia, it is a Catholic institution. Statistically. Like 42% more likely to get abused there, sexually abused there, than any other institution. That's not me having a crack at the church, I'm a priest. That is me saying that's the stats. And as somebody who went through that abuse, when you've been abused and yet it looks like God's over there and it's owned like that, that's not a place for me. So now I'm outside of that, I'm outside of God, and I'm over here trying to make sense of something on my own. I don't fit. That's not policy. The policy reflection on that is when Bishop Hart 2 days ago says, when somebody comes in and says my child's being abused, I won't, because I've got a direct access to God, whatever that means. And whether he's right or wrong, there are 6 other religions at least with as many numbers that are saying you got it wrong, mate. When you have that conversation, I would say as a country that says, actually, you have mandatory reporting. The moment that you don't do that, Archbishop, we will actually take away your charitable status. We will actually ensure that your assets are frozen. We will ensure that you go to jail. Because that's the rule. In fact, you believe in some God and you think Mary was a virgin and then Jesus was the only, all that stuff. You can have all that. I'm an Anglican, so I'm Catholic Christian, but you can have all that, but that is no way to separate and alienate. And so when I look at it, I arrived here in this country, and I arrived getting the job at the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence just at the time as Kennett was closing the institutions that would actually care for and give space to people with mental illness or a mental disability, actually saying they'll be better in the community, not with anywhere for them to go. I actually think Robert Doyle was in charge of health at that point, I think, as it happens. But, I think, one of the interesting things for me is that policy in itself suddenly says it's going to be better for you in community. We're not going to think about that, and we're not going to do anything with that, but it's certainly going to make it easier for us. And people liked it. Developers loved it. There were all these big sites that they could turn into housing. They made Kew. They made a ton of money out in Kew. That policy is great. So you actually have to, for me, when I look at it, I looked at the marriage equality debate. It's absolutely fundamentally changed who I am. I realised that I was offered to choose whether I was heterosexual or homosexual, and I chose heterosexual. In this debate, I realised that my children don't make that. They don't make that choice. They've got a spectrum. They're on it somewhere, and they're going to shift in and out of it. And I realised, I made that choice, and that set me apart against others. And so when I was in a situation where I was excluded, there were some men that wanted to help me that were homosexual that I pushed away because I had made a choice and they were wrong. I went to my first gay club on my own the other night just to kind of just say, I've just got to get out of this, you know, there's only one way to be living life. You know, my children have that freedom and I never had that freedom. How do I change that? How do I change my judgment of looking at somebody and saying, you're not me like me, rather than we are somewhere on a line? There's not much policy in this, is there? Or maybe there's a lot, we'll see. So, Indigenous, I arrived here at this country and I went to the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence as the CEO. And our thing, the starting place was that we would work with the poorest people in Australia. And we actually had the largest policy arm, even bigger, social policy arm, even bigger than universities in the country at that point, like 40 policy workers working in this area. So I went, okay, show me the policy and the activity that we're doing around Aboriginal. Let's start there, because clearly that would be the poorest place to start. We had no Aboriginal programs or Aboriginal policy at the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence when I started. I mean, and that's not that they're not good people, right? It's just we didn't. We were doing stuff on refugees, not on homeless people, because we left that to, there was a couple of great organisations doing it, but we had a bunch of stuff that we were doing. And I was told by a senior executive team, there aren't many people here. I'm thinking, where's here? We had Australia in our heading. I think they meant Melbourne, which still wouldn't be true, because you could actually go down and meet a bunch of Indigenous homeless people at that point at St. Paul's. And my job just before that was in youth detention in the prison. You went to juvenile justice, you could also meet a bunch of young Indigenous people. It wasn't true. Lastly, and completely differently, if the impacts of climate change that we're suddenly seeing are felt, 300 people in Bangladesh with the smallest tsunami will lose their home. We will lose the delta of Bangladesh. There are 300 million people homeless. It will dwarf any sense of poverty or any sense of any of the issues that we have had to deal with at all. So clearly the way that we are viewing people when they are homeless is inadequate in terms of what we're facing, either in terms of the 74% increase on the streets of Melbourne or the potentials of people losing their whole home and their whole island or a third of their country over a weekend. But you see, we don't value them because we value a system that says, actually, and I know because I was a Tory and I voted for Mrs. Thatcher and I was a stockbroker, and so I know what's important. And I know because my grandfather was very, very poor, was a prisoner of war in Japan for 5 years, and actually had a single mother who actually made her living by living across a pub and selling her body. So my dad taught me what this is about. It was about me getting on. It's about me buying a house that isn't going to get flooded. And even if you went through exactly the same circumstances as me, I get to look around and go, but I bought the right house. I chose the right side of the street. I'm better. I'm better. And we have a problem while we see that. You might want to name that. I think it's appropriate to name that as market economics. We need growth. We need small amounts of people leading. They get to show how good they are by getting better at it. And for that, they need more population. And they don't have to worry about them because they're actually worrying about the bit of whether I win or not and whether my bit's better. We haven't got space for growth. The planet hasn't got any more room for more people. We're already living unsustainably. We have some significant issues. So I want to talk about two things then. Some policy that I've been involved in the last 6 months, and then a few things about the end. And I'm waiting for you to send me a little thing that says 5 minutes. You will you? I'm not there yet. Good. And I'm just checking we're going to do it, because otherwise I'll enjoy the time. And so in terms of the council, when one of my reasons for standing for council, as I said, my major reason was about getting Brooke elected. But then I had to think, well, what can I offer? And I thought, well, I know something about homelessness, and I know if you want an outcome on homelessness, I just know one thing, is that you don't alienate people more. And you certainly don't get tough with them, because it's already frightening. And so if you have any kind of policy that says, right, if you're homeless, we're going to clean you up and we're going to use the police to do it, that's not going to help. It's just, first of all, it's not going to work. There's lots of evidence for that, but it actually doesn't help, and it further alienates and further makes frightening. And for those people who, through homelessness, were making some links, who were getting together, who were then, because they were getting together, getting out, or taking those steps to going, oh well, maybe I can fit in, even if it's right here on the street, then maybe I will risk fitting in here somewhere else, in accommodation, or in something to think about employment, or training, or knowledge. But I need to feel safe enough to do that. So making it less safe is going to make it harder to change it. Thank you. No, I missed 5 and I'm at 1. I knew that's going to happen. That's why I was asking for it. I wasn't even looking. No, I'm good. I'm actually happy to stop. So one of the things is that we have not got that policy and we have dropped it. We've dropped that policy, but partly because I think we had an internal conversation, and I think the Lord Mayor found a way out of that, and I'm really glad we have. I think, lastly, I would say, so I don't know what the right policy is. It's about affordable housing. It's about listening to people who are in it every day for the next, it's about those people, but it's not about getting harder. What I would say in terms of solutions is I spent 10 years, was certainly the most exciting 10 years of my life, living and working with homeless people. I ran an organisation where 90% of the, a bit more than 90%, but 90% of the people in the organisation were homeless, and that included the management. When I left, the person that took me over was a homeless person that started the organisation as a volunteer when I started the organisation. I have never, ever experienced being loved as much as I did. We tried everything, and we got it wrong lots. And we laughed lots. And I remember one day thinking, we're going to go out of business, we got it wrong. And there's a guy that we had as a volunteer, and he had a mental illness, and he was there for respite, and he came 2 days a week. And he's come in and he's got a broom and he's turned up the volume of the music, and I am trying to raise money to keep this thing alive, and he's got the music up and he's got the broom and he's going to the music, and he walks into the office. He said, "Nick, can you get out of it for a little bit?" And I'm thinking, oh no, can I dance? Oh, we got to keep dancing. Thanks very much.